Defense Chief Pete Hegseth announced on Monday the United States carried out an airstrike in the Eastern Pacific, sinking 2 ships, killing 6 alleged narco-terrorists. That now makes it the 4th airstrike on suspected drug dealers this month, bringing the total to 18, with more than 70 killed since the military campaign began in mid-September. Al Jazeera reporting that the UN's human rights chief, Volker Turk, calling all these airstrikes a violation of international law. Last Thursday, the Senate, in a 49-51 vote, rejected a measure sponsored by Virginia Democrat Senator Tim Kaine that would have required congressional approval for Donald Trump to launch a military strike against Venezuela. The measure was co-sponsored by Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul, who has called these airstrikes illegal. South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham voted against the resolution, saying you can't substitute Congress's judgment with the president's. Graham said, quote, Venezuela in the hands of Maduro is an existential threat to the people of the United States. Absolutely. I wake up every morning thinking, how dare Venezuela nationalize its oil back in 2007? Those are the largest known oil reserves on the planet, bigger than Saudi Arabia. And if we don't topple the Maduro regime and make sure Exxon and ConocoPhillips are reimbursed for the billions of dollars worth of assets seized by the Venezuelan government, our entire way of life is at risk. Well, Tuesday's elections did not go well for Republicans. Apparently, Americans don't like warmongering, unapologetic racists. Speaking of whom, here is Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville. He is running for governor of Alabama. Here he is talking to Steve Bannon on Steve Bannon's show, The War Room. Here is Tommy Tuberville responding to Zohran Mamdani's big win in New York City.
But we're in a different country, Steve. This is a different time. We just saw what happened in New York. We lost New York. It will be completely Muslim in 3 or 4 years. That's what they want. They're going to have everything free there for them, and they're just going to spread throughout the country. We better wake up and smell the roses.
So we're going to all be Muslim in New York City. Now, he's from Alabama. There was a time when you expected somebody from Alabama to talk this way, but this is the Republican Party. It's every Republican in every state. The Trump administration has capped the number of refugees allowed to seek asylum in the United States at 7,500, with practically all those slots given to white Afrikaners from South Africa, falsely claiming their land has been stolen by the South African government run by black people. A State Department memo was leaked last month revealing that the Trump administration will only grant asylum to white people of European origin who are escaping tyranny from black governments. Again, this is not Alabama. This is the entire Republican Party. The Washington Post now reporting that Naomi Sept, a 25-year-old white nationalist from Germany, is receiving help from influential Republicans like Florida Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna to get political asylum here in America, claiming she is the victim of persecution in Germany because of her white nationalist views that she spreads to thousands of her followers on social media. Sate is a strong supporter of the Alternative for Germany party, which scored second place in this year's parliamentary elections, but is not part of the coalition government thanks to what is known as the firewall, which keeps Nazis out of leadership positions in Germany. Regardless of how well they do in an election, J.D. Vance, our vice president, in a visit to Germany before the elections, condemned this firewall and said the Alternative for Germany party was made up of people who love their country, patriots, and they deserve a voice. They deserve an opportunity to participate in the German government. The Alternative for Germany party calls for the complete removal of Muslims from Germany, regardless of citizenship. This girl site says she and the Alternative for Germany party are the transatlantic bridge that unites Germany with the MAGA movement. Paula Deen had one of the top shows on the Cooking Channel until a 2013 lawsuit revealed her affinity for the N-word, and she admitted that she uses it a lot. So she disappeared from the Food Channel and Target, as well as Walmart, dropped her line of cookware. We all thought that was the end of her. Guess where she's been showing up lately? Mar-a-Lago. Lara Trump, who is married to Eric Trump, has been trying to rehabilitate Paula's image. Here she is. Here's Paula Deen at one of Mar-a-Lago's parties this past weekend, attended by Donald Trump. You want to get close to Donald Trump? Have a history of using the N-word. Meanwhile, the racist war against immigrants here in the United States continues. The number of detainees in ICE facilities, now the highest on record, sitting at 66,000. 66,000. Meanwhile, border crossings are at an all-time low. They haven't been this low since the 70s. But this is what's contributing to Donald Trump seeking poll numbers. Last Tuesday's blowout election results, and Democrats leading Republicans by nearly 10 points in the latest generic congressional polling for next year's midterms, it says Americans are not that racist. Now, you might remember that last year Donald Trump scored nearly half the Hispanic vote. This is from The Hill. According to CNN exit polling, New Jersey Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill won the support of 68% of Latino voters, while Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger received 67% support from Latino voters. So it's cratering. The Latino vote for Republicans is cratering. Republicans losing the Hispanic vote, and they're about to lose the Catholic vote. The Pope offering up strong words against the president's attacks on Venezuelan ships. The Pope accused Trump of increasing tension rather than working to defend the peace. The Pope said Trump needs to move towards dialogue and away from violence. The Pope, over the weekend, was asked about the treatment of immigrants in his hometown of Chicago. The Pope was asked about priests and ministers not being allowed to perform communion inside the ICE detention center in the suburbs of Chicago for the detainees. Here's what the Pope had to say.
Father, in Chicago, authorities banned Catholic priests to give communion to migrants in detention. Do you have any advice for them how to get spiritual communion when they can't get a real one? And also, what kind of rights migrants under detention should have?
Well, let me say that I think in the first place, the role of the church is to preach the gospel. And just a couple of days ago, we heard Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25, which says, Jesus says very clearly, at the end of the world, we're going to be asked, how did you receive the foreigner? Did you receive him and welcome him or not? And I think that there's a deep reflection that needs to be made in terms of what's happening. Many people who have lived for years and years and years, never causing problems, have been deeply affected by what's going on right now. The spiritual rights of people who have been detained should also be considered, and I would certainly invite the authorities to allow pastoral workers to attend to the needs of those people. Many times they've been separated from their families for a good amount of time. No one knows what's happening, but their own spiritual needs should be attended to.
This has been the longest government shutdown in American history. We're now entering the 42nd day with around 1.4 million government workers not getting paid. It began on October 1st when fiscal year 2026 began, and because there was no budget, no continuing resolution to keep the government open until a budget could be passed, the government shut down. Now it looks like the Senate may vote to temporarily end this standoff until January, the end of January, with 7 Democrats and 1 independent voting to move a bill to the Senate floor that would keep the government open until the end of January. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said he couldn't support the measure because it does not guarantee an extension of the expiring Affordable Care Act health insurance subsidies. With insurance premiums for 2026 skyrocketing, Schumer called the failure to renew these subsidies catastrophic. But Schumer, voting against it, couldn't keep 7 Democrats and 1 independent, Angus King of Maine, who caucuses with the Democrats. Schumer couldn't keep them from breaking ranks and voting to reopen the government. Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, said he will not support the bill because it does nothing about restoring Obamacare subsidies. There are probably enough votes in the House without the Democrats, but who knows? So far, the problem has been the Senate, where Republicans don't have a filibuster-proof majority. Many Democrats not happy. Gavin Newsom calls the decision to compromise a betrayal of the working people. Newsom saying these 7 Democrats and that 1 independent have caved on Obamacare subsidies. However, it does look like part of the deal is to schedule a vote on renewing the Obamacare subsidies in the second week of December. Bernie Sanders calling that vote a meaningless gesture. Meanwhile, 1,800 flights were canceled on Monday, with more than 4,000 delayed. Up until Friday, we were told this shutdown could last well into Thanksgiving, and that it's probably a good idea to postpone our holiday travel plans. Now it looks like some sort of deal has been made in the Senate. House Speaker Mike Johnson telling members of the House to return to Washington, D.C. Johnson said he would schedule a vote 36 hours after the Senate passes their version of a continuing resolution. So maybe this week the government reopens. And while it looks like some kind of deal may be made, there is the issue of food stamps. Millions of Americans are still waiting for them. If the government does reopen, part of the deal is to fund the food stamps program throughout the rest of 2026. But one big, beautiful bill passed and signed into law on July 4th of this year, work requirements for food stamps. Food stamps go out on the first day of every month. They went out on October 1st, on the first day of the shutdown. But now we're more than 10 days into November, and the delivery of food stamps has been delayed for millions of Americans. Some are just beginning to receive them, while others are still waiting. The New York Times reporting millions of families right now are in limbo, uncertain when and if their monthly nutritional stipend will arrive, even if the government opens this week. 25 states and Washington, D.C. sued the Trump White House, demanding that Donald Trump dig into emergency funds and get the food stamp money out the door. For the first time in its 61-year history, the food stamps program has been interrupted, with Trump repeatedly saying nobody's getting any until the government reopens. Well, he's been all over the map, doing what he does best, sowing confusion for our most vulnerable. One day it's no food stamps, the next day it's some food stamps. The lower courts demanded Trump make payments in full, but Trump told the courts he was only willing to make partial payments. The Supreme Court issuing an emergency ruling over the weekend, temporarily upholding Trump's right to only make partial payments. As this issue winds its way through the appeals process, the Trump White House telling all 50 governors in Washington, D.C. to stop work on distributing full payments of food stamps. They had to start all over again this weekend because, for the time being, the court said Trump can only, if he wants to, only dispense half the food stamps subsidies. The Independent reports that delaying food stamps, even for several days, means millions of Americans go hungry. So that's what's happening right now, even with the government possibly opened by the end of this week. The Independent also pointing out that Americans throw out $400 billion worth of food each year, while at the same time we spend $100 billion a year on food stamps, which are also known as SNAP. Asked about people losing food stamps, Trump said, quote, "When you talk about SNAP, you're talking about largely Democrats," unquote. He said this is more of a problem for Schumer and Jeffries than it is for him and his fellow Republicans. Politically, Trump claimed Democrats have more to lose than Republicans when food stamps are cut off, because more Democrats rely on food stamps than Republicans do. Nice, right? Politicizing hunger. Well, research confirms he's a little right. According to the Seattle Times, on average, red congressional districts have about 11% of their population relying on food stamps. Blue congressional districts, 13.8%. So obviously, it's also a Republican problem, especially since Republicans are the party slashing food stamps. And they're slashing food stamps with or without a government shutdown. One big beautiful bill slashes them. This is a political problem for Republicans, not Democrats. Republicans showed their hand to voters. We all see how cruel they really are. And last Tuesday's election results reflected that we saw how cruel they are. Trump's politicization of hunger knows no bounds. The Hill reporting our Department of Agriculture, which administers food stamps, on its website, officially claiming Democrats are to blame for food stamps not being sent out, holding Democrats responsible for the shutdown, holding them responsible on the USDA website. That is a direct violation of the Hatch Act, which expressly forbids government employees, or in this case, the actual government, from using the government and its resources to engage in any political activity. California Governor Gavin Newsom has been doing a terrific job debunking Republican lies about food stamps. He said in California, the overwhelming majority of those receiving food stamps work for a living. He said the rest can't work because they're in school, have some sort of disability, are caretakers, have been laid off, or they're seniors. It's not a game. You don't starve people to cover another one of your massive tax cuts for the rich, but that's what Republicans are doing. Gavin Newsom also points out quite accurately that SNAP has the lowest rate of fraud compared to any other government program. It's like voter fraud. It doesn't exist. Republicans create phony problems in order to ignore the real ones, like poverty. Half this country can't come up with $500 for a medical emergency, so Republicans create the phony problem of Medicaid fraud or food stamp fraud. The same applies to voter fraud. It's a phony problem to draw attention away from the voter suppression going on in red states, making it harder each year for people of color and those of us living on the margins to cast a ballot. Voter fraud doesn't exist. Voter suppression does. Americans aren't voting more than once. Millions of undocumented migrants are not flooding the border to vote for Democrats. No matter how many times Elon Musk, Mike Johnson, and Donald Trump claim they are. Now, they say there's voter fraud. They say millions of migrants voted in the last election, yet they can't produce a single example of one person committing voter fraud. Now, occasionally we hear reports of someone who lives in New York City, has a vacation home in Florida, and is registered in both places, but they get caught, and that's not voter fraud. And usually those people are Republicans. Voter fraud doesn't exist. During his first term in office, Trump set up a blue ribbon commission to study and then crack down on voter fraud. That blue ribbon commission had to be shut down because they couldn't find any evidence of voter fraud. Republicans thrive off anecdotal evidence. They find one horrible murder in New York City and they point to it and say, see, crime is out of control. But when it comes to voter fraud or migrants ripping off food stamps, they are incapable of producing one single shred of anecdotal evidence. Where's the poster child for voter fraud? Where's the poster child for food stamps fraud? Why can't you find one person, a person of color who has voted more than once? Why can't you find one person, a person of color who is ripping off the food stamps program? Not one. Because if there were such an individual, we would know that person's name, where they live, what they eat, and where they go to the bathroom each day. That person doesn't exist. If that person did, the Republicans would plaster their face all over the news. So if Republicans can't come up with one piece of anecdotal evidence for voter fraud or food stamps fraud, why would anyone believe there are millions of people voting illegally and stealing food stamps? Why would anybody believe that? Because they want to believe it. Where is the anecdotal evidence? One shred of evidence that you can blow out of proportion. Where is the proverbial welfare queen that Ronald Reagan loved to talk about? Reagan first ran for president in 1976, and he used the racist dog whistle of a welfare queen to roll back Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs of the 1960s. That welfare queen was, in fact, a real woman, and a black woman who did, in fact, rip off welfare at a scale where someone should seriously consider making a movie about her. She was like something out of Catch Me If You Can. Wigs, aliases, posing as a Native American, a Jewish woman, a blonde, dozens of aliases and 33 different identities. The woman was both a genius and, more importantly, an outlier. One piece of anecdotal evidence that Reagan, 4 years after he first mentioned her, was able to ride all the way into the presidency, convincing poor white people, black people are getting a free ride. So where is the anecdotal evidence of one undocumented immigrant collecting food stamps? There is none. Republicans can't find one to demonize. But Republicans want you to believe the food stamps program is riddled with fraud. They say we're too generous a nation, and undocumented migrants are flooding the country to take advantage of our largesse because we have such good hearts. Because we have such good hearts, they're able to collect food stamps and rip us off. Yeah. On average, food stamps are $6 a day. $6 a day. That's why these migrants risk their lives stumbling through the Darien Gap, a 60-mile treacherous path of dense jungle, wild animals, and human predators to make it here. They go through all that for the promise of $6 a day in food stamps. Undocumented immigrants, documented immigrants, non-citizens do not get food stamps. It's against the law. I have some Republicans, friends who say, just because something's against the law, that doesn't mean some of them aren't getting food stamps. They're not. Maybe. It's minuscule. Nobody's been arrested for food stamps fraud. So you're going to deny 42 million Americans nutrition in order to punish what? 3 Guatemalan kids? Republicans repeat lies. They say something like 60% of all, quote, illegal aliens are on food stamps. Not true. 96% of all food stamps recipients are U.S. citizens. According to the New York Times, the other 4%, now pay attention to this, the other 4% are non-citizens living in households that do receive food stamps. So, when a meal is prepared using meat and vegetables paid for by food stamps, those non-citizens are served some of it. Shall we crack down on this? Should ICE break into their homes, demand to see everyone's papers before they're allowed a knife and a fork? Randy Fine is the despicable Florida House Republican who thinks because he wears a yarmulke, he's a man of God, when in fact, that's just a tinfoil hat painted to look like a yarmulke. He is the worst of the worst. On the subject of food stamps, Randy Fine, who never missed a meal, no doubt even on Yom Kippur when he should be fasting, Randy Fine accused all 42 million Americans who need supplemental nutrition of having a sense of entitlement. And he just introduced legislation banning non-citizens from collecting food stamps. Good thinking there, Randy, because with all that's going on in the world, what we need right now is a bill banning non-citizens from collecting food stamps. Randy, while you're at it, you should also introduce legislation that outlaws murder, because it's already against the law for people in this country who aren't citizens to collect food stamps. Nobody undocumented, nobody who is not a citizen is collecting food stamps. More importantly, immigrants who aren't citizens pay taxes. They don't have Social Security numbers because they're not entitled to Social Security. They are given what are called individual taxpayer identification numbers, and they use those numbers to pay taxes. In fact, that's what ICE uses to round up most of these people. Under Trump, the IRS is handing over to ICE individual taxpayer identification numbers to make it easier to find people in this country who are not citizens, but are paying taxes. ICE grabs them and throws them into detention. So, how are they undocumented if they have individual taxpayer identification numbers? How are they illegal if they're paying their taxes? Practically all the people snatched by ICE are documented. They're in the system, waiting years for their immigration hearing, which all these immigration hearings are backlogged because instead of hiring more immigration judges, one big, beautiful bill just hired 40,000 new ICE agents while capping the number of immigration judges at 800. There are close to 4 million immigrants waiting to go before a judge. That means they're here legally. They're in the system waiting to go before a judge. But right now, there are only 700 immigration judges, and one big, beautiful bill stipulates that at any given time, there can only be 800 immigration judges tops, no more than 800 judges, while the number of immigrants getting rounded up is skyrocketing. Thanks to one big, beautiful bill, we're about to have 40,000 new ICE agents rounding up people with tax ID numbers, rounding up people waiting for their immigration hearings. In fact, that's where ICE hangs out. They grab people showing up for their immigration hearings. In 2 years, we're going to have about 100,000 new for-profit ICE detention jail cells and no more than 800 immigration judges to provide the people in those cells, along with the 4 million others on the waiting list. We're going to have 800 judges to give them the due process our Supreme Court ruled this year that they're entitled to. There's no way that can be done. Immigrants, non-citizens, are not a drain on our economy. They're net positive. Every study shows this. They pay more into taxes than they get back in government services. In fact, one study shows that non-citizens boost the Texas economy so much that what they pay in sales taxes alone far exceeds what they get back in government services like schools, roads, and infrastructure. There are currently 6 million undocumented immigrants with individual taxpayer identification numbers. Roughly 4 million filed tax returns last year. It is estimated they pay about $100 billion a year in federal, state, and local taxes. They contributed close to $7 billion to Social Security last year and Medicare, none of which they are entitled to. They also contribute another $13 billion to unemployment insurance, not entitled to that either. They are collecting our fruits and vegetables, but they are not collecting food stamps. They prepare our food, deliver our food, serve our food, wipe our grandparents after they digest that food, but they are not eating that food for free. This is one of the big lies Republicans repeat so low information voters scapegoat people of color, migrants and immigrants, instead of blaming the people responsible, the oligarchs who are causing all our nation's economic pain because they pay little to no taxes and starvation wages. 42 million Americans rely on food stamps, otherwise known as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Now, it used to be food stamps, but in the last year of the George W. Bush administration, food stamps, they changed the name to SNAP benefits. At the time, Republicans said, oh, we want to remove the stigma associated with the program. Food stamps, they claimed, was demeaning, but SNAP sounded, I guess, snappier. The truth is, the people with all the money who have hated food stamps from the start, they knew that it would be much easier politically to slash funding for SNAP than it would for food stamps. Voting to cut SNAP benefits, especially for children, sounds a little more Christian than cutting food stamps for children, because food stamps has the word food in it. That's why I still call them food stamps. You can call them SNAP benefits. Either way, the New York Times reports 1 in 8 Americans require this monthly stipend. Otherwise, they starve or are forced to make choices to go without other necessities. The federal budget for fiscal year 2025, which ended on October 1st, came in at a little more than $7 trillion. Of that, $100 billion was spent on food stamps. That amounts to 1.4% of the entire federal budget to make certain that people living in what we are told is the wealthiest country in the history of civilization, we do this so they don't starve. Some of you may be lucky enough to have never have required food stamps. So let's clear up some misconceptions. The government isn't handing out free food. It's not setting up government-sponsored food stamp pantries where people with food stamps present their EBT card to get their weekly allotment of nutrition. No, like everything our federal government does, when we help people in need, corporate interests must be the primary beneficiary. So yes, food stamps are a government handout, but not to the people who rely on them for nutrition. They are a government handout to big ag, to the big grocery chains and all the corporations that mass produce the garbage they try to pass off as food. One would think, given all the government subsidies the food industry receives from taxpayers, one would think that when Americans go to the grocery store and purchase food with food stamps, they would get those groceries at cost. No, doesn't work that way. People who purchase hamburger meat on food stamps pay the same amount as people who can afford the hamburger meat. That's America's idea of equality. So long as corporations get their cut, we're all equal. Food stamps are an economic stimulus package. It's Keynesian, because when you give money to people who need that money, they spend it. Whereas tax cuts for the rich, tax cuts for corporations are what I call dead money. Rich people and corporations hoard their money. They don't spend it. Corporations don't create jobs. They're slashing jobs. You see what's going on right now. They got their big tax cut from one big beautiful bill, and the job creators are laying everybody off, and they use the money, their profits, to buy back stock. It's dead money. Rich people don't spend money. They put it in dead assets like stocks, treasuries, CDs, art, or more homes. And while, yes, that money creates some stimulus, it mostly serves as the undergirding for our economy. It creates stasis. It's money with relatively low velocity, creating supposedly no inflation, compared to money given to people who need money, which is what I call live money, because it immediately goes out into the economy. Thanks to what economists call the multiplier effect, the dollar that you give to people who need it, it finds its ways into tens, hundreds, thousands of hands. For example, it is estimated that for every dollar the U.S. government spends on food stamps, the economy adds $1.73 more to our gross domestic product. I believe that is a very conservative estimate. Food stamps are what allow companies like Walmart to keep their wages so low. Their wages, not their prices. When you go to work for Walmart, inside all the paperwork they hand you is a form that you can fill out to collect food stamps. In many parts of our country, corporations pay so little, it's automatically assumed their workers will need financial assistance. Food stamps. They hand you an application for food stamps. Welcome to Walmart. Here, fill out this form to get food stamps. Eli Rosenberg over at the Washington Post wrote 5 years ago that, according to the General Accounting Office, more than 3% of all the people on food stamps in Arkansas, where Walmart is headquartered, they work for Walmart. 3% of the people on food stamps in Arkansas work for Walmart. But wait, it gets worse. Forbes reports that Walmart just warned investors that if SNAP benefits are canceled for the month of November, the company would lose billions of dollars in revenue. So let's take a breath here. Allow that to sink in. Walmart is warning its investors that if food stamps for the month of November don't go out, the company loses billions in revenue. Our federal government spends $100 billion a year on food stamps, and 1/4 of all of it is spent at Walmart. 1 out of 4 people on food stamps use them at Walmart, the same corporation that pays its employees so little they need food stamps, and there's no discount. Quarter milk at Walmart costs the same whether you buy it with or without food stamps. Ismael Martinez is an economist with the Economic Policy Institute, telling Newsweek on October 27, quote, SNAP benefits make up about 8% of all retail spending on groceries. Even a short interruption of this spending could lead to layoffs or other painful adjustments in this sector. 8% of all the money spent on groceries in this country comes from food stamps. He goes on to say, Walmart alone accounts for almost 1/4 of SNAP spending, about $25 billion. Walmart collects $25 billion a year in food stamps. And like I said earlier, it accounts for more than 8% of their grocery revenue. 5 years ago, Senator Bernie Sanders commissioned a study from the General Accounting Office to determine which companies have the most employees collecting food stamps. According to that study, roughly 1/4 of all cashiers checking you out at a big box retail chain or a grocery store need food stamps. Eli Rosenberg wrote in the Washington Post 5 years ago that according to this study, Walmart and McDonald's top the list of low-wage employers whose workers require not just food stamps, but Medicaid as well. Food stamps and Medicaid are what makes it easier for corporations to pay crap wages. It's socialism, as you know, for the rich, not the needy. In America, charity is just another way to increase the bottom line for the wealthy and the powerful. Yet Zohran Mamdani, New York City's next mayor, is called a radical Marxist because he wants to open a government-run grocery store in each of the city's 5 boroughs, government grocery stores that will sell food at cost, selling food that the price doesn't factor in rent or property taxes. It's not free food, it's just food at cost. The markup on groceries in New York City is 40%. In the past 5 years, the price of groceries in New York City increased 70%. And you know who opposes one government-owned grocery store in each of the city's 5 boroughs? The grocery stores, right? They think one grocery store in each of the 5 boroughs selling food at cost is unfair to Whole Foods, which is owned by Amazon, Trader Joe's, D'Agostino's, and Gristedes. It's unfair because they're forced to pay market rents in the city. Fairness. Is it fair that 8% of their revenue comes from food stamps? Is that fair? Which means the federal government has to pay a 40% markup to guarantee that Americans don't starve to death. Is that fair? Where is the fairness in grocery stores adding 40% markups on items purchased by people on food stamps? Where is the fairness in profiting off food insecurity? The same people who don't care about the immiseration of the poor or the working poor are the same ones who say life is unfair. Get over it. Except, of course, when it comes to their bottom line. Then it's all about equity, all about fairness. Donald Trump's favorite refrain is, it's so unfair when he's been caught. It's so unfair when he feels cheated or when he feels he's being treated like the rest of us are. When he's not feeling threatened or cheated, he justifies cutting food stamps by saying life is unfair and it's not the job of the government to manufacture positive economic outcomes. So starve to death. For Republicans, it's all about personal responsibility for everyone else. Louisiana House Republican Clay Higgins, who used to be a cop, then he couldn't be a cop anymore, so he became a politician. He just said interrupting food stamp payments shouldn't affect anyone with a sense of personal responsibility. So if you don't have personal responsibility, you should die. He said anyone who doesn't have 1 month of food stockpiled for an emergency, like the one we're having right now, a government shutdown, he says you're not entitled to food stamps because, he said, quote, wow, stop smoking crack, unquote. Louisiana Congressman Clay Higgins. The New Republic writes, Higgins, like all United States members of Congress, collects $79 a day in meal comps, tax dollars. Meanwhile, the average SNAP benefit is $6 per day. $6 per day is what we're talking about. The most you can get is $8 to $9 a day. So get out your calculator. The New Republic points out that Trump's very own Department of Agriculture, which administers food stamps to the states, the Department of Agriculture projects it costs on average $250 a week to feed a family of 4 if they do everything they can to stretch it. But the USDA, that's the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA says it really costs $1,600 a month to feed a family of 4 when both parents are working and there's nobody home all day standing over a pot of soup. Okay, got your calculator? A pound of hamburger meat costs between $6 to $8. You get 4 patties from 1 pound of hamburger meat. We're not talking steak, we're just talking hamburger meat. You gonna feed a family on food stamps? 40% of Americans who collect food stamps are already working. Now, get out your calculator. The minimum wage in America is $7.25 an hour. That's $1,160 a month if you work 40 hours a week. The average rent is $1,600 a month. Let's say you're making $15 an hour, okay? Because that does seem to be a lot of states, the minimum wage is approaching $15 an hour. Okay, that's $2,400 a month. Rent is $1,160 a month. You pay your rent, that leaves you with about $800 for crack for the entire month. The average gram of crack these days goes for anywhere between $60 to $100 per gram. I've seen it occasionally go for $50 at Walmart. So let's say $60 for a gram of crack. Let's say you're a weekend crackhead, Friday through Sunday, $300. That's $1,200 a month on crack. Maybe you can stretch the crack with baby laxative, but there's no way in this country you can afford to smoke crack living at or below the poverty line. So obviously it's Clay Higgins, Congressman Clay Higgins. You're the one who needs to get off the pipe. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for listening. Please share this episode. Please hit the like button so I remain in your feed. Subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to my newsletter. Hit the notifications bell. Thanks to Bob and Mila in the chat room. Leave a comment. I read all your comments. Thank you for listening.